Hi there, this is Benjamin Krudwig from Benjamin Krudwig Fiber Arts and Designs, and this is lesson number 9 of how to crochet a Raglan style sweater. We are in the very last couple of lessons before the very end of the course. So at this point you will have finished the body, you will have finished the sleeves, and you will have done the cuffs and the hem of your sweater. So at this point, we're going to talk about weaving in your ends. Earlier in a couple of episodes ago, or lessons ago, you were taught how to crochet around your ends. Sometimes there's a certain stitch that you're working on that won't allow you to crochet around it, and sometimes you forget, but you also tend to have the ends of yarn at the very end of your project. So what I've done here is I have turned my sweater inside out because all of my ends happen to be on the inside of my sweater, and I have left a few ends sticking around. That way I can show you how to weave them in. So let's start with the ones that are more common, which are going to be the ones at the end of your work. So here I am at the back of the neckline, and I have two tools that I like to use when weaving in ends. I have a tapestry needle here, and it's a very sharp one. This helps to go into the stitch, so this is actually going to sew the yarn into the stitches. I also like to use a crochet hook that's a smaller size than when I crocheted. And that just it helps get into the stitches. So I have this end here at the top of my neckline, and since it's on the end, I'm actually going to see if I can do it with my crochet hook. So I like having my crochet hook in my right hand in the direction that I'm crocheting. So I tend to measure out by sight the end that I want to weave in, and then fold it in half because I want to backtrack, so that helps the yarn not come out of the work when I am crocheting. So it's about this stitch here that I'm going to start my weaving in. I'm going to take my hook, come from underneath in just one V, and then continue to just come underneath each of these V's until I get to where the point that my end originates from. So that gives me about 4 loops on my hook, and then I'm just going to take that piece of yarn, my end, and pull it through all of those loops. Sometimes it's kind of difficult to do that. Your yarn tends to want to catch. So then there's my yarn again. I'm going to bring it back around. And so on this other side, I'm actually going to come from the top of the stitch. So basically, I am mirroring all these stitches with this yarn. And I'm going to pull it back through. I'm going to be very gentle. I don't want to create a pull or any weird looks into my neckline. So then I'll just kind of stretch it around, and that will hide the end a little bit. For other ends that are kind of in the middle of your work or kind of short, so this one right here is just kind of chilling out. This is where I did the color change. And I actually probably crocheted around this piece of yarn, but some of it has backed out. So I'm actually going to take my tapestry needle on this one, and I'm going to put my hand underneath. Be very careful if you do this, just so you don't, draw blood. And you don't want to sew your end into the other side of your sweater. So I'm going to take my needle here, and just insert it into these stitches that are right below that piece of yarn. So you can see that it's just right down that line. I don't have to go very far down because this is a very short piece. So I'm going to take this end here and I'm just going to pass it through the needle, the eye of the needle. And I'm going to pull that piece through and voila, it is gone. So in some cases, you're going to have a piece or two pieces from where you did a color change, or in this case, I started a new ball of yarn. This is on the sleeve, or one of the sleeves. And I could, if I so chose, take both of these and run them through one way. But that sometimes creates a very bulky, lumpy spot that I don't think is appropriate for this purpose. You know, it's a garment and you want it to look finished and nice. So I'm just going to fold that up so it doesn't fall off my table. So what I like to do is separate the two yarns and weave them in separate directions. So again, I'm going to put my hand inside the work. And I like going down through the stitch. Like so. I'm going to take one of my ends and pass it through the eye. And then pull it through. And then the other one, I am going to have go sideways. And this just creates a little bit more strength in the bind off, or in the hiding of the yarn. So if I went back the opposite way, it would be possible that the stress between the two would try to back one of them out. But because this is going a different direction, the stresses are going to be different. You know, rather than vertical, this one will be a horizontal weave in. And then at this point, I could keep weaving this one in, but because I'm pretty happy with where, like how long that weave-in is, I'll just grab a pair of scissors and very carefully cut that little bit off and put it in. In this case, I have a location where two colors are actually in the same area, same location, and I need to weave those ends in as well. Well, if I weave in the red into the green, it could look really bad. It'll look like a mistake. So you want to make sure that when you weave in an end, you weave it into the area that the color corresponds to. So the green is actually coming from an opposite area than the red. So in this case, I might actually tie a knot just to get them on their respective sides. And I just tied a really loose knot because I don't want to make my cuff really tight. But I still want to, you know, get the colors in the right spots. So this very long piece, I'm tempted, since it's at the cuff, I am going to weave it in one way and then back the other way, just so, since the cuff gets a lot of wear and tear, it won't back out, and then I'll have to weave it in again, and again, and again, or I'd have to keep cutting it down. So again, I'm just going right through the stitches, and passing the yarn through. I find, especially with wools, the ends start to get a little frayed. So I just lick my fingers a little bit to get a nice point on the yarn. This one's actually giving me more trouble. So sometimes I'll just super twist an area, bend it back on itself, and then send the fold through the eye. Yeah, that one worked much better. So I'm going to go this way, and then without letting the yarn come off, since this is a particularly long tail, I'm going to go back the other way through all of these stitches. I'm going to pinch where it came out so I don't create a cinch. And you see I have this tiny loop here. I'm going to gently snug that little end in. That way I don't cinch up the fabric. And in this one, since it is such a long tail, I'll just cut it off. Now the red is actually going into some different stitches. These are double crochets, the front loop and back loop. So I'm going to try and run my needle up the posts of these double crochets. Okay. And that is how you weave in the ends of your crochet project. These techniques work the same whether you are working on a blanket or on a sweater or a hat. They're all the same sort of techniques. You can also use those techniques in a knit setting. So you could even use a crochet hook to weave in the ends around the V's of your knit stitches. The preferred method is sewing them in. It just really buries the yarn into the fabric. So in our next tutorial, we are going to talk about how you wash and block your sweater. The reason I mention that now is because when you sew in the ends or weave in the ends, the washing will actually help set those ends in place. So it's very important to do the weaving in of the ends prior to the washing and blocking of your garment. Come on back to lesson number 10 and we will have a slightly different setup. So I will see you then.